AskReddit by meme collector GG. Lawyers of Reddit, what's the wildest loophole you've seen exploited in a courtroom that succeeded? I racked up parking tickets in law school, only to find out that the district had changed but the signs were never removed. The street behind the school was in a different district, one with no time limit on parking. The neighbors didn't want students parking for hours on end, so they treated it as de facto timed parking. I defeated the tickets, but only after the contentious hearing where the hearing officer asked me why I thought it was okay to park wherever I wanted despite the signs. I said the signs don't matter if they're not legal, and he said enforcement, meter maids, go by the signs, not the map. I asked if I could just put up signs wherever I wanted to not have people park and they would enforce it. He didn't have answer for that one. It really bothered me that the school made a big deal about getting a dispensation on parking time during exams, because the exams were an hour longer than you could park. Their argument is essentially, the government can put up whatever signs and enforce them, irrespective of what the law says. That's a wild thing to argue in court, lol. Wasn't there that drug dealer in Ireland in like 2015 who appealed his conviction on the basis of the drug laws being unconstitutional and won, thus making drugs legal in Ireland for a day while they scrambled to fix the oopsie? Basically, he argued that their Misuse of Drugs Act required them to get parliamentary approval to add new drugs to the list of banned drugs, which they had been neglecting to do for a few decades. The courts went, well fuck, and ruled most of the list unconstitutional. That's an absolute corker to pull out of the back pocket, no mistake. H5861. That dude had big balls and nothing to lose. I'm not a lawyer, but this was a fun one to watch. Someone received a speeding ticket on Main Street in Ann Arbor. He proves that 85% of drivers on that road drive faster than the speed limit and argues that the limit was improperly set under Michigan's anti-speed trap law. Judge agrees and ticket is thrown out. If everyone speeds, nobody does. How was he able to prove that so many drive speed on that road? How about the comma that changed a verdict? HME pay for dairy truck drivers. What's amazing about that case isn't the Oxford comma itself, but the fact that the judge who wrote the panel decision packed as many commas into it as possible. I got the physical evidence, a bag of drugs, thrown out because the officer reached into my client's pocket before patting the outside first. Because that was the only evidence that my client committed a crime, the prosecutor was forced to dismiss the entire case. So, Fourth Amendment violation because no probable cause for the pocket search? Heard of at least one case where the defendant was charged with carrying a loaded firearm without a license, but the count had to be dismissed because it turns out the dumbass had loaded it with the wrong caliber bullet. The police lab tried repeatedly to get the gun to fire in the range using the defendant's bullets, but even they couldn't make it work. So technically the firearm didn't count as loaded under the statute. It wasn't quite case dismissed, because there was a lesser charge that still applied to an unloaded firearm, but it was a much less severe charge. Not sure if that's a loophole, but it's one of the funnier and more harmless get out of jail free cards I've seen. The iconic photo of a lawyer with an AR-15 and his wife limp-wristed holding a pistol was an interesting one. The pistol had been used as a prop during a court case, so it had been altered such that it couldn't fire. When the police seized it, they noticed that it had been rendered inoperable and fixed it. Altering the state of the pistol from an inoperable prop to a weapon didn't help their case. Still in law school, but I'm amazed at how few loopholes there are. I'm always on the lookout, but there's usually some catch-all, some provision, some exception, some countervailing doctrine that prevents it. The closest thing I've found to a clear loophole is that some items are exempted from the list of what can be seized to satisfy a judgment against you, but without specifying a maximum value. Like under NYCPLR 5205, even though exempt books can't exceed $500 in value, religious texts have no such limit, so theoretically, if you invested all your money in expensive rare Bibles, They couldn't be taken no matter what. If you want to find loopholes, look at newly implemented legislation. Old legislation will have been amended over time as loopholes are found and closed. New legislation is typically full of untested gaps and loopholes. Not a loophole, but a fun one just the same. The defense witness destroyed my case. Destroyed it. I was going to lose. I had just one question. Didn't you offer to sell your testimony to my client? Answer: yes, but we never came to an agreement. We settled in the hall after the defense attorney quickly asked for a recess. Did you know that that would be the answer, or were you fishing and got lucky? Ian, all but two come to mind. For a period of time in my state, if you got a speeding ticket, you could have a hearing and request the radar technician to testify that the equipment had been calibrated correctly. Given that there were only 2 technicians qualified in the state, they basically never showed up, and the ticket would get thrown out. Another, a local cop, got charged for catching the wrong size fish, basically poaching. Since he lied to the game officer in his statement, all prior convictions that relied on his testimony became easy appeal cases. I knew a judge in Florida. This was a while back. He's long since retired. Sorry, that if the cops came to the court with the radar gun said so, he insisted on seeing the calibration logged for the device. Apparently he threw out a lot of tickets. Marvel successfully argued that mutants are not people, so X-Men action figures get a cheaper tariff. That has some unfortunate implications. The wildest loopholes I've seen are really tame. The cops made mistakes. A truck driver given a ticket for driving an overweight truck over a bridge, and the cop didn't weigh the truck. A guy given a ticket for failure to yield at an intersection when he did a U-turn in the middle of a highway, causing an oncoming driver to rear-end him. Stupid stuff like that. I know a guy that got away with a DUI because of fruits of a poisonous tree. They pulled him over for an illegal U-turn and then gave him a DUI. The problem? It wasn't an illegal U-turn. The cops made it even worse though when they were caught on the dashcam saying, one cop talking to another. Cop 1, I don't know what to do. He passed the field sobriety test. Cop 2, arrest him anyway. Criminal defendants charged with stealing an item must be charged with stealing an item from someone. That someone must be a legal entity. I once represented a guy who was charged with stealing dog food. He was homeless and trying to feed his dog. Needless to say, I was sympathetic, so I was willing to pull something of a dirty trick for him. I queued him up for trial. As soon as the first witness was sworn in, I moved to dismiss the entity he was charged with stealing from. Walmart. That is not a legal entity. I think the real name was Walmart Stores, Incorporated or something. Case immediately dismissed. Since a witness had been sworn in, double jeopardy prevented them from trying him again. Not a lawyer. This happened about 10 years ago in Wayne, PA. Was in court testify against a former employee for stealing. The case before his was a drunk driving case. It was open and close case. Lady blew twice the legal limit after roaming into a parked car at a gas station. The prosecution's case was simply the arresting officer's testimony as and either brief or as a results. After the prosecutor questions the officer and rests his case, you could see the defendant's lawyer chuckle. I thought it was odd and then I found out why. Defending lawyer stands up and spouts off some PA code and asks the judge for an immediate dismissal. Judge grants it but is visibly pissed. He then immediately takes recess and calls both the officer and prosecutor into his chambers. It was about 3 minutes of the judge berating them both and the whole courtroom could hear it. It turns out that at some point during the prosecution's case, either he was supposed to ask the officer or the officer was supposed to say that he had been specifically trained to use the breathalyzer and detect impaired driving, and by failing to do so the prosecution failed to meet the necessary requirements for the conviction. It was wild. Now, just a bibliophile and a fan of American history. In a book about Coke County, Texas by a lady named Yarborough, she mentioned that a young man was taken before the judge in the small town for firing his gun in the street. The young man was brought before the judge, who pulled up the statute and read it, and it said essentially it is an offense to discharge a firearm in the streets of Robert Lee, Texas. He then asked the boy to describe exactly what he was doing, why, and where he was. The boy said, "Well, I was standing in the lot on this side of the street and saw a badger in the lot on the other side of the street in the other lot. I pulled out my rifle and shot the badger." The judge said he was free to go as he had not been standing in the street when he shot, and thus had not broken the law. I saw a similar story on Reddit years ago. Drunk died on horse rolls into town, firing wildly into the air. Except he was firing a shot each intersection, which was the legal expectation, as he was riding a horse. He still got in trouble for being piss drunk with a gun, though. Anti-LGBT laws in Hungary missed a comma, which changed the whole meaning. The intent was that all books with a gay character should be wrapped in foil and sold separately from other books. The actual law was that if the books are sold separately from other books, they should be wrapped. Bookstore was fined. They went to court and win. Their huge fine was dismissed. Not a lawyer, but close to one. In law school in Finland, they were taught about a case where a man was on trial for failing to pay back a loan. His lawyer argued that he shouldn't be convicted of delinquency. No idea what the actual terms are in English, bear with me, because he never had intended to pay the loan back in the first place. And he won the case. The reason was because the prosecutor had made a mistake. He had prosecuted the man only for the lesser charge of being delinquent and making payments, and forgot to write up the alternative charge of outright fraud. So the court had to rule that there was reasonable doubt whether the man actually committed the act he was on trial for. Ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, this is Chewbacca. You kid, but this is a real legal maneuver now. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Chewbacca_defense. Friend was pulled over for expired plates driving his mom's car. Got a ticket. Friend went to court, tried to argue his case, but was told he can plead guilty or innocent, and no deal on a lesser charge was offered. So he pled innocent, and went to trial. Side note, this guy's brilliant. Studied physics in college, worked with reactors for a bunch of years, then gave up his high-income job to go to law school. In court during the short trial, the friend argued his ticket for expired plates is a tax violation, rather than a moving violation, and no one can be held liable for another person not paying their taxes. Somehow the judge agreed, tossed the ticket, and thereby forced the district attorney to cancel the tickets of several other people who received tickets for similar violations. I was told lawmakers were forced to rewrite the law 6 months later. Oh my god, I completely see the logic of his argument, but if I studied law for a zillion years, I bet I'd never be able to connect the dots on my own. A lawyer acquaintance knew of a few places where there were no parking signs, but the areas were somehow missed in the bylaws. He defeated all the tickets. So the college I went to when I was there had students write parking tickets. If you contested them, you got a trial at county court. Well, if you got a ticket and contested, there was a high chance the student ticket writer didn't want to show up because a trial date would end up after the school year when everyone is home. So the parking tickets would get thrown out before trial. Wild loopholes aren't really a thing, but what is a thing that I've seen a lot is judges knowing absolutely nothing about a particular area and being convinced to make a blatantly wrong decision by a quack expert because they don't understand the expertise of the actual, real qualified expert and therefore cannot be appropriately convinced by it. To give a general example of where this type of thing comes up, Quack experts have caused judges to send people to prison for serious crimes like murder because they present bunk statistics that sound really convincing that the chance of this person being innocent is like 0.0000001%, and the judge, or jury, doesn't understand statistics, so they are convinced by that. In addition to quack experts' BS numbers, there's also completely correct statistics by an expert that are chosen to be intentionally misleading. The defense in the O.J. Simpson trial at one point argued that the chance a domestic abuser murders their spouse is really low, which is true. The problem is that it isn't the correct comparison. The correct one would be the chance that a domestic abuser, whose spouse ends up murdered, is the perpetrator of the murder. That turns out to be quite high. How does it take you 5 minutes to cook breakfast, when it takes 20 minutes for a grid to soak in water? Guy tried to say he was a fast cook, but the lawyer said the law of physics don't cease to exist in his kitchen. The lawyer asked him if they were different in his kitchen. He didn't state that they were, as that would be objectable by the prosecution as conjecture. My cousin Vinny was in the courtroom and told me the story. In some places with lesser offenses you can shop for a judge by getting a continuance until you find one who won't throw the book at a particular offender. I know someone who was arrested for occupying trespassing a bank during an Occupy Wall Street protest. Since the bank had received a huge public bailout and hadn't yet repaid its debt to the US government, my friend's lawyer was able to argue that the bank was public property, and got the case thrown out. Had a child abuse jury trial. The prosecution rested and hadn't proven that the toddler was under the age of 16, which was an essential element of the crime. Judge dismissed the case mid-trial due to it. I am a lawyer. I specialize in tax and litigation, civil, not criminal tax. The biggest loophole is money. Can you pay your lawyer to be as creative and annoying as you can? It's literally that simple. Trump is a very good example of this. Bog down the court with motion practice, beg for continuances, and throw absolutely everything possible you can because you can. You won't see a public defender or a low-income clinic attorney do this. There is simply not enough of them. It's like all the attacks on the judge's daughter. Trump knows it's not a legitimate complaint, it's sleazy and ridiculous. But he's hoping the judge gets so angry that he says there's no way he can be impartial and recuses himself. Just to buy himself more time and sow chaos.